Within each of us lies a journey of healing waiting to be discovered. This is one of the hidden journals of a completely unknown person, whose personal quest for transformation is reflected on every page. Adapted for easy understanding, the content of this diary explores the depths of self-knowledge, confronting inner shadows, and awakening the inner power we all possess. Through emotional reflections and timeless teachings, this book will guide you on a path to freedom, personal mastery, and true self-love. Each chapter is an invitation to discover your own capacity to heal and grow, facing life's deepest challenges with courage and authenticity. How to heal emotionally and mentally. Author unknown. At some point in our lives, each of us reaches a crossroads, a moment when we realize that what we have been doing no longer leads us to where we want to be. It is in that instant between frustration and hope that the true journey begins, the journey toward inner transformation and personal mastery. This book is an invitation to explore the power that lies within you, a power that often remains dormant, waiting to be awakened. Life is not just about what happens around us, but about how we choose to respond, how we decide to face our shadows, and how we build our reality from within. I remember the moment in my life when I realized there was something more, something greater than immediate results or external appearances. There was a calling, an inner restlessness that told me true change would not happen if I kept looking for answers outside. The journey had to begin within me, and that was the moment I awakened to the power of personal transformation. I ask you, are you willing to face yourself? If so, this book will be your companion on that journey. You are not alone in this process. We all face our own shadows, our own internal struggles. But what I have learned, and what I want to share with you, is that within each of us lies an incredible strength, a greatness waiting to be unleashed. The awakening to inner power is not a destination, but a continuous process of discovery and growth. It is an invitation to live authentically, to free yourself from the chains of fear and doubt, and to take full responsibility for your life and your decisions. The power to change your life is within you. This book is only a tool to help you remember it and guide you through the process. May every word inspire you to see beyond the limitations you have believed you had, and may every reflection bring you closer to the person you are destined to be. Chapter 1. The Equivalent Exchange. The Hidden Law of Life. Sometimes the Journey. To understanding begins with a simple question. What am I willing to give to receive what I desire? From an early age, I learned that nothing in life is achieved without giving something in return. The law of equivalent exchange is not an abstract truth. It is a universal rule that governs every aspect of our existence, but it doesn't always manifest in an obvious way. It is often subtle, hidden in the daily actions we perform without thinking. Once, at a critical moment in my life, I found myself facing a decision that would change everything. I had achieved what many would call success. I had the job, the relationships, the financial stability, but inside I felt an emptiness. I knew there was something that didn't fit, a missing piece in the puzzle of my soul. It was at that point that I understood that although I had achieved what I desired, I had not given enough value in return. I began to question myself. What have I really given? How can I rebalance this invisible exchange that regulates all our interactions? Equivalent exchange is not just about money or material possessions. It is something deeper. Every time we invest our energy, time, love, or effort into something, we are participating in this law. And if we don't give in the same measure as we receive, life will remind us. It is an invisible but implacable law. Imagine for a moment that you are building a relationship, whether personal or professional. Think about the times you have expected to receive understanding, support, or success without having sown enough in that relationship. The frustration that follows is not the result of the other person or the external world. It is a reflection of the imbalance in the exchange. Life always seeks balance, even if we don't always see it immediately. When I found myself at that crossroads, I decided to change. I began to give more, to be more conscious of the value I was giving to the world. I began to understand that to receive love, I first had to give it unconditionally. To have success, I had to serve others, helping them achieve their own successes. And to find peace, I had to sow it in every interaction, in every word, in every thought. I asked myself, what are you willing to give to live in balance? A man can sow seeds his whole life, but if he does not take care of the soil, if he does not water with love and effort, the harvests will never come. The equivalent exchange teaches us that every action has a reaction, and what we give, we receive back, although not always in the same form. I remember a time when I helped a friend in a difficult moment without expecting anything in return. I did it because it was the right thing to do, because I knew my soul needed to act in accordance with what I wanted to receive. Sometime later, when I least expected it, I received unexpected support in a completely different situation. This is how life works. The good you give sooner or later comes back in ways you cannot anticipate. Now I ask you, what are you giving to the world? It is easy to get trapped in what we want to get, but the true secret is to focus on what we are willing to offer. If you sow love, you will receive love. If you sow effort, you will reap success. And if you give your true value, the world will respond with abundance. The law of equivalent exchange is not just a truth I learned, but one I live every day, because life, in its essence, is a constant flow of giving and receiving, of balancing what we long for with what we offer. And in the end, it is in that balance that we find true fulfillment. Chapter 4. The Weight of the Past. Overcoming physical and emotional burdens. The past has a particular way of clinging to us. It is like an invisible weight, a burden that we carry silently over the years, without realizing how it affects every aspect of our lives. We carry it on our shoulders, in our minds, in our hearts. But what happens when you decide to let go of that weight? What happens when you choose to release the burdens that have limited you for so long? I remember a time in my life when I felt trapped by my own past. There were mistakes I made, decisions I didn't make, and moments of pain that seemed to be etched in my memory like deep scars. It was as if every step I took was conditioned by that emotional burden, by the weight of what I had been. How can I move forward if the past keeps pushing me back? I asked myself. It was a constant struggle, but in that struggle I also found my answer. The physical and emotional weight of the past can be overwhelming, but it is not unbreakable. We don't always recognize how emotional burdens manifest physically. One day, you wake up and feel an inexplicable heaviness in your shoulders, in your chest, as if something invisible is pushing you down. That burden is the past. It's everything you haven't let go of. And what I've learned is that until you consciously choose to release it, it will continue to affect every aspect of your life. A friend once said something that resonated deeply with me. The past cannot be changed, but the way we carry it can be transformed. In that moment, I realized that I had been carrying the past in the wrong way. I had clung to it as if it were an inevitable part of my identity, when in reality it was just an experience, something that had happened, but not something that should define my future. I ask you, what burdens do you carry today? What experiences, emotions, or decisions from the past are still weighing on you? We all have those stories, those memories that haunt us, those emotions that we haven't fully processed. Maybe it's a broken relationship, a failure at work, or a loss that you never knew how to overcome. Whatever it is, the truth is that you don't have to carry it forever. The physical weight of the past can also manifest in our bodies. Sometimes it's accumulated stress. Other times it's the physical exhaustion we feel for no apparent reason. When I was younger, there were moments when fatigue seemed to invade every part of me. My mind was trapped in thoughts of the past, in what I should have done, in what could have been. I didn't realize that by carrying emotional burdens, I was also exhausting my body. And then one day, I made a decision to let go. It was not an immediate or easy process. It required work, reflection, and a conscious commitment not to allow those burdens to dictate my life. I asked myself a question that changed my perspective. What will I gain by clinging to the past? The answer was clear. Nothing. Nothing except more pain, more frustration, and more exhaustion. Overcoming the weight of the past does not mean forgetting, but liberating. It does not mean you should erase the lessons you have learned, but that you stop allowing those experiences to define you. The past is not your identity. It is only a part of your story. You have the power to write the next chapter. I want you to think about this. How is the past affecting you today? How are the decisions you made years ago influencing your present? Perhaps you find yourself at a crossroads, wanting to move forward, but feeling that something is holding you back. That something is the past, and although we cannot always control it, we can control the way we carry it. When I finally decided to release the burdens of my past, I felt as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I felt lightness, freedom, and above all, a deep inner peace. I was no longer tied to what was but allowed myself to focus on what could be. That is the true key to overcoming the physical and emotional burdens of the past, refocusing your energy on what is to come instead of what has already happened. Every person who reads these words carries their own weight from the past. Maybe you don't always notice it, but it's there. The question is, are you ready to let it go? Are you ready to free yourself from what has kept you tied for so long? The past doesn't have to be a prison. It can be a tool, a lesson, something that propels you forward. But only if you choose to free yourself from the burden you have been carrying. Because at the end of the day, true freedom is not just physical, it is emotional. And when you free yourself from the weight of the past, you open yourself up to a future full of possibilities. The weight of the past may seem immovable, but I assure you it is not. You have the power to let it go, to free yourself, and to move forward with a lightness you may not have felt in years. It is a journey of healing, self-discovery, and empowerment. And when you finally release those burdens, you will feel something profound in your soul, the true sense of freedom. Chapter 5. The Mirror of Business, Healing. Personal wounds in the professional world. The world of business can be a surprising reflection of our deepest wounds. In every decision we make, in every professional relationship we build, our past experiences, insecurities, and unresolved emotions are reflected in the mirror of our actions. Success or failure in business is not determined solely by our skills, but also by the wounds we carry within. I clearly remember a moment in my professional life when I found myself at a breaking point. My company, which I had built with so much effort, was going through difficulties. No matter what I tried, nothing seemed to work. Sales were falling, customers were not returning, and my team's motivation was plummeting. In those dark days, I asked myself again and again, what am I doing wrong? How can I reverse this situation? What I didn't understand at the time was that the answers were not only in the business analysis, but within me. My personal wounds, those I had ignored for years, were influencing every decision I made. The insecurities I carried from my youth, the doubts about my abilities, and the fear of failure were reflected in every aspect of my company. How is it possible for your personal wounds to affect your professional life? I ask you this question because many of us are not aware of how what we experience outside of work influences our work life. Imagine that from a young age, you were taught that you had to please others to receive love or approval. That belief could lead you years later to give in during important negotiations, to underestimate your value, or to accept unfavorable conditions for fear of displeasing your superiors or clients. I myself fell into that trap. Without realizing it, I was managing my company from a place of emotional insecurity. My need to be accepted and to avoid conflict led me to decisions that were neither strategic nor beneficial for the business. Instead of negotiating from a place of strength, I did so out of fear. I was allowing my emotional wounds to dictate the course of my professional life. It was then that I faced a difficult truth. Your company is a reflection of yourself. That realization shook me deeply. If my business decisions were being influenced by unresolved wounds, what else in my life was being affected by them? I knew that if I wanted to change the course of my company, I first had to heal the wounds I had been carrying for so long. Healing personal wounds in the professional world is not a simple process, but it is absolutely necessary. I began to work on myself, on my personal growth, on facing the emotions I had buried under layers of productivity and success. I asked myself, what are you really afraid of? Where does this fear come from? And what I discovered was revealing. My fear of failure did not come from business itself, but from past experiences, from moments when I had felt I was not enough. The business world is a mirror. It reflects our strengths, but also our weaknesses. When we have not healed our wounds, that reflection can show us a distorted panorama, full of decisions based on fear, doubt, and the need for approval. However, when we make the conscious decision to heal, to face those fears, something profound changes in the way we manage our business. We begin to lead from security, from confidence, from clarity. I remember a day after I had begun this journey of personal healing when I had a crucial meeting with a client. In the past, I would have entered that room nervously, worried about whether my proposal would be good enough, whether the client would be satisfied. But this time was different. I entered with confidence, knowing that my value was not tied to that person's acceptance, but to what I knew I could offer. The result was amazing. Not only did I reach the agreement, but I felt a deep inner peace, a sense of being in control of my own destiny. What emotional wounds are influencing your professional decisions? I ask you this because if you don't stop to reflect on it, you could be making decisions from a place of weakness instead of strength. Maybe without realizing it, you are allowing the fear of rejection or the need to be perfect to guide every step you take in your career. But let me tell you something. When you heal those wounds, you not only improve as a person, but also as a professional. Business is not just a matter of strategies, numbers, or sales. It is an extension of yourself. And when you begin to heal, when you do the necessary inner work, the impact is reflected in all areas of your life. Healing personal wounds not only transforms your professional life, but also transforms who you are as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a human being. This chapter is an invitation to look in the mirror of your professional life and ask yourself, what do I need to heal to move forward with clarity and confidence? Because when you heal those wounds, you free yourself from the limitations you have imposed on yourself and allow your true potential to shine, both in business and in every aspect of your life. Chapter 6. The Emotional Mycelium. How connection heals generations' life, like trees in the forest, is connected by an invisible network of emotions and experiences. This network, which we could call the emotional mycelium, is what connects us to our parents, grandparents, and even generations we never knew. Through these connections, we inherit not only physical characteristics, but also unresolved emotions, traumas, and behavioral patterns that continue to affect us unconsciously. I remember the day I realized that the emotions I had been carrying for years were not entirely mine. It was a profound revelation. As I reflected on my life and the decisions I had made, I realized that certain emotional patterns seemed to repeat themselves. I felt that some of my struggles, my fears, even my failures, did not come solely from my personal experiences, but from a chain of emotions that went back much further than my own existence. What emotions are you carrying that are not entirely yours? Maybe you have wondered why you are afraid of failure, why you sometimes sabotage yourself, or why certain behavioral patterns seem to repeat in your life despite your efforts to change. What I discovered was that in many cases, those emotions had been transmitted from generation to generation, as if they were part of an invisible legacy. One afternoon, while talking with a close friend, he shared a metaphor that changed my perspective. He told me, "The trees in a forest are connected by the mycelium underground. Through those connections, they share nutrients, but also share stress when one of them is damaged. In the same way, we are emotionally connected to our families, and those connections can both nourish and wound us. The emotional mycelium works similarly. The unresolved emotions of our parents and grandparents, the wounds that were not healed, can be transmitted to us, affecting our lives in ways we don't always understand. But just like a forest, those connections also offer us the opportunity to heal, not only for ourselves, but for future generations. I wonder how the inherited emotions of your ancestors have affected your life. Maybe you haven't realized it, but it's possible that many of the emotional struggles you face today come from unresolved wounds that were transmitted through your family lineage. Unprocessed pain, fear, and even the expectations of past generations can manifest in your own emotions and decisions. One day, while reflecting on my childhood, I remembered something my mother used to say: "Never let them see you as vulnerable." For many years, that phrase defined my life. I strived to be strong, to appear invulnerable to others. I didn't realize it at the time, but that belief came from her own fear, from her need to protect herself from a world she considered hostile, and unintentionally, that same belief was transmitted to me. Healing the emotional mycelium is a powerful act. By doing so, you not only free yourself, but you also free the generations that came before you and those that will come after you. I began my own healing process by recognizing that many of the emotions I felt were not entirely mine. I began to examine where those fears and emotional blockages came from, and I discovered that by freeing myself from them, I was allowing my children and future generations to grow without the emotional burden of my ancestors. When we think about healing our emotional wounds, we tend to focus only on ourselves. But what we don't always understand is that by healing, we are also healing a much broader emotional network. The emotional connection we have with our families is a bridge to collective healing. Every step we take toward personal healing has a profound effect on those around us and on the generations to come. What emotional patterns have you inherited, and what can you do to heal them? Perhaps you have noticed that certain behaviors or emotions repeat in your family. Maybe it's a tendency toward anxiety, a fear of failure, or an inability to express vulnerability. The first step toward healing is awareness. By becoming aware of these inherited emotions, you can begin to free yourself from them, allowing future generations to live with greater emotional freedom. I remember a conversation I had with my son, in which I realized I was repeating the same words my mother had told me. "Don't show weakness." At that moment, I stopped. I realized that by repeating those words, I was transmitting the same fear I had inherited. And so I made a decision to break that pattern. I decided to teach my son that true strength does not lie in hiding our emotions, but in facing them with courage and honesty. The emotional mycelium is a powerful network of connection, but it is also a network that can be healed. Through awareness, reflection, and inner work, we can break the emotional patterns that have limited our families for generations. And when we do, we not only free ourselves, but also open a path to a fuller and freer life for those who will follow us. This chapter is an invitation to explore the emotional connections you have with your past and your family. What patterns do you need to heal to free yourself and future generations? Because when you choose to heal, you are transforming the emotional legacy of an entire family line, creating a future full of possibilities where the wounds of the past no longer have the power to determine the destiny of those who will come after you. Chapter 7. Healing Beyond the Self. Repairing the Wounds of the Family. Lineage. There are moments in life when we realize that our story does not begin or end with us. We are part of something much bigger, a chain of generations, experiences, emotions, and wounds that do not always belong to us but that we feel deeply. Healing beyond the self is an act of love, a commitment to repair not only our own wounds, but also those that have affected our family for generations. I remember when I first realized that my struggles were not just mine. There were emotional patterns in my life that repeated themselves again and again, no matter how hard I tried to change. I asked myself, why do I keep making the same mistakes? Why does it seem like I'm carrying something bigger than my own decisions? The answer came when I began to reflect on my family, on the challenges my parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents faced. I began to see a clear line of unhealed wounds, repressed emotions, and limiting beliefs that had been passed down, from generation to generation, like an invisible legacy. Healing beyond the self involves looking back and understanding that our personal wounds are part of a much broader emotional network. What wounds of the family lineage do you carry? Maybe you haven't thought about it before, but I invite you to reflect on the difficulties that the generations before you faced. Were there behavioral patterns that were repeated? Were there unexpressed emotions, unresolved conflicts, or limiting beliefs that were transmitted to you? Many times, the struggles we face today are not entirely ours. They are echoes of past stories, of experiences that were not resolved and that continue to affect us. Once, while talking to a mentor, he told me something that changed the way I see life. You cannot change what your ancestors lived, but you can heal what they left you. Those words resonated deeply within me. I realized that although I could not change the past, I had the power to free my family from the emotional chains that had kept us trapped for so long. I began to observe how the fear of failure had affected my family for generations. My grandfather, my father, and I had all been victims of this fear, a paralyzing fear that prevented us from taking risks and pursuing our dreams with courage. This fear was not just mine. It was an inherited wound, transmitted from one generation to another. It was then that I understood that healing my own wound was not enough. I had to do the work of healing beyond myself, of breaking the patterns that had limited my family for generations. This involved not only facing my fears, but also acknowledging the pain that had been transmitted to me, a pain I did not always understand, but felt deeply. Healing the wounds of the family lineage is a transformative process, not only for you, but for all those who came before and for those who will come after you. When you decide to heal, you are freeing your family from the emotional burdens that have been transmitted for so long. You are creating a new path, a new story for yourself and for future generations. I wonder what patterns you have noticed in your family. Maybe you have realized that certain behaviors or emotions repeat in your lineage. There may be a tendency toward sacrifice, fear of success, or an inability to express vulnerability. By becoming aware of these patterns, you have the power to break them and create a different future, not only for yourself, but for your entire family. One afternoon, after having begun this healing journey, I sat down with my father. It was a difficult but necessary conversation. There were so many unexpressed emotions between us, so many unspoken wounds that had somehow affected our lives. At that moment, I understood that healing beyond the self is not just an internal process, but also an act of connection with those around you. Talking, listening, and understanding the wounds of those who came before you is a crucial part of the healing process. Healing the family lineage is an act of liberation, a gift that you give not only to yourself, but to your entire family. By doing so, you are breaking the cycles of pain, fear, and suffering that have affected your lineage for generations. You are creating a space for future generations to live with greater emotional freedom, without the burdens you have carried. Chapter 8. When Love Hurts. Redefining self-worth and true affection, love, in its purest essence, has the power to lift us up, to make us feel invincible. But when love hurts, when it leaves scars instead of healing, we are faced with one of life's deepest lessons, that of redefining our self-worth and understanding what true affection means. When love stops nourishing us and begins to hurt us, it is not just a matter of relationships, but a matter of how we see ourselves. I remember a time in my life when I confused affection with sacrifice. I thought that loving meant giving everything, even if that meant losing myself in the process. I believed that if I tried hard enough, if I made all the necessary sacrifices, love would be worth it. But what I discovered was a difficult truth to accept. Love that hurts is not true love. How do you know when love hurts? It's a question we all need to ask ourselves at some point. Sometimes we are so immersed in the dynamic of a relationship that we don't recognize the signs of pain. We tell ourselves that all sacrifice is part of love, that difficulties are normal. But over time, I learned that when love constantly hurts, when it makes us feel less than, when it robs us of our sense of identity, it is not love that is at stake, but our ability to value who we are. Once, while talking to a close friend, I told him how I felt in a relationship I had been in. I felt worn out, without energy, as if I had given everything I had and received nothing in return. He told me something I will never forget. True love will never make you feel like you have to diminish your worth to receive it. Those words made me reflect deeply. I realized that love should not be a transaction of sacrifice, but a mutual exchange of respect and care. Redefining self-worth in the context of love is a profound process. It leads us to ask ourselves uncomfortable questions. How am I valuing myself? Am I accepting less than I deserve? For a long time, I thought my worth was defined by how much I could give, by how much I could do for others. But in that process, I forgot something fundamental. My own worth does not depend on what I give, but on who I am. In my experience, many of us fall into the trap of thinking that to be loved, we must make constant sacrifices. We tell ourselves that true love requires suffering, that pain is part of the process. But what I have learned is that true love does not ask you to sacrifice your dignity, your identity, or your emotional well-being. True love lifts you up. It does not diminish you. I wonder, in what relationships have you found yourself sacrificing your self-worth? Maybe you have been in a relationship where you felt belittled, where your emotions were ignored, or where you felt you were always giving more than you received. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that's normal. That's what love means. But I invite you to reflect on a deeper truth. Love that hurts is not love. It is a lack of connection with your own worth. One day, after years of struggling with this concept, I sat in silence and asked myself a simple but powerful question. What do I really deserve in love? It was a revealing question, because until that moment, I had never considered my own needs, my own desires. I had always been focused on others, on what I could do to make them happy. But in that moment, I realized something. To receive true affection, we must first give ourselves the affection we deserve. Self-worth is the key to redefining true affection. You cannot expect to receive authentic love if you have not learned to value yourself first. That's what I discovered on my own journey. I began to set boundaries, to say no when something didn't feel right, and to prioritize my emotional well-being. By doing so, I began to attract different relationships, people who valued who I am, not just what I could do for them. Now I ask you, what are you willing to do to redefine your self-worth in the context of love? It's not about being selfish, but about understanding that the healthiest love is that which is born from a place of self-worth. If you find yourself constantly sacrificing your happiness, your well-being, or your identity for the affection of another person, maybe it's time to stop and ask yourself if that is really love, or if it's a distortion of what love should be. When I finally began to value myself, I discovered something extraordinary. True love flows when you stop desperately seeking it in others and begin to cultivate it within yourself. It was no longer about how much I could do for someone, but about how much I could take care of myself while sharing my life with another person. True affection does not ask you to lose yourself in another, it asks you to find yourself in the relationship. Chapter 9. Lessons from Pain. Turning childhood struggles into wisdom pain has a strange way of teaching. In our childhood, we face challenges that we often don't understand. Pain touches us, molds us, and although at the time it seems incomprehensible, over time it becomes a profound source of wisdom. The struggles of childhood, those that marked us, are the most valuable lessons we carry throughout our lives. I remember as a child moments of confusion, of feeling small in the face of the world. I often asked myself, why is life so hard? It was a question that arose in moments of frustration, on those days when nothing seemed to go right. But what I didn't know then was that every struggle, every obstacle I faced, was planting the seeds of an inner strength that I would one day understand. What can you learn from pain? It's a difficult question to answer when we are children, when everything seems unfair and the answers are not within our reach. But the truth is that, in retrospect, pain is not just a source of suffering. It is also a teacher. The emotional scars we acquire in childhood are not simply wounds. They are reminders of the lessons we needed to learn. One afternoon, while talking to a mentor who had overcome countless challenges, he told me something that changed me forever. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. What you choose to do with the pain is what defines your wisdom. At that moment, I understood that the struggles I had faced as a child were not something I should run from, but something I should embrace. Pain was not a punishment, but a tool to discover my true strength. I wonder what struggles you faced in your childhood that still resonate with you today. Maybe it was harsh words from an adult, loneliness, or rejection from your peers. Whatever the source of that pain, I now ask you to see it from a new perspective. What lesson was it trying to teach you? Often, the biggest difficulties are those that prepare us for the most significant moments of our lives. In my case, the struggles of childhood taught me to be resilient. They taught me to get up when I fell, to find in myself a source of strength that I had never known existed. But what is even more important, they taught me compassion. Because when you have experienced pain, you become more aware of the suffering of others, more willing to help and understand. Turning struggles into wisdom is not an automatic process. It's not enough to have gone through the pain. We need to reflect on those experiences, extract the lessons, and allow them to transform us. One of the most valuable lessons I learned is that no matter how difficult the beginning of our story was, we always have the power to write the end in a different way. Think about this. How can you transform your childhood struggles into wisdom for your current life? Maybe there were moments when you felt insufficient, but didn't that teach you to fight for your worth? Perhaps you experienced rejection, but didn't that teach you the importance of accepting yourself first? I remember a specific moment in my childhood, one of those moments when the pain seemed insurmountable. It was a dark day, full of doubts, and I felt small in the face of the world's magnitude. At that time, I didn't know how to handle my emotions, how to understand why what others said or did hurt me so much. But over the years, reflecting on that moment, I realized that it had taught me something powerful, that my worth did not depend on the validation of others, but on how I saw myself. The struggles of childhood are fertile ground for personal growth. Although at the time they seem unfair, painful, and overwhelming, over time they become the basis of our wisdom. The child who experiences pain is also the adult who can find answers, who can heal and transform those wounds into valuable lessons, for their life and for others. Today, I invite you to look back at your own life. What lessons have you learned from your own struggles? It's easy to get trapped in the narrative of pain, but when you choose to look beyond the suffering, you discover that every challenge brings with it a pearl of wisdom, an opportunity to grow, to heal, and to become a stronger version of yourself. Chapter 10. The Power of Forgiveness. Healing. The Inner Child. Forgiveness is one of the most powerful tools for healing, but we often don't understand its true impact until we decide to use it on ourselves. Forgiving is not just an act toward others. It is a gift we give to ourselves, especially to that inner child who still carries wounds from the past. I remember a moment in my life when I was confronted with an uncomfortable truth. There were parts of me that had not healed, wounds I had been carrying since childhood. Despite everything I had achieved, those scars were still influencing my decisions, my relationships, and the way I saw myself. I asked myself, how is it possible that something so old still has so much power over me? And it was at that moment that I understood the importance of forgiving not only those who hurt me, but also myself. What wounds do you carry with you from childhood? We all have moments in our lives that marked us, words or actions that were etched in our minds. Maybe it was a comment that made you feel less than, a rejection you didn't know how to process, or a betrayal that left deep scars. But what I learned is that the first step toward healing is forgiveness. Forgiveness frees us from the invisible chains that tie us to the past. One afternoon, while reflecting on my childhood, I realized something crucial. My inner child, that vulnerable and sensitive part of me, was still carrying the weight of unhealed wounds. I had learned to move on, to be strong and resilient, but I had never stopped to listen to the child I once was. I had never considered that to truly move forward. I had to heal that part of me that was still clinging to the pain of the past. Forgiving the inner child is an act of deep compassion. We are often our own harshest critics. We judge ourselves for the decisions we made in our youth, for not having been strong enough, brave enough. But the truth is, we did the best we could with what we knew at the time. The child we were does not deserve our condemnation, but our forgiveness. They deserve to be freed from the expectations and judgment we have carried for years. I wonder what emotions from the past are still affecting you today. Maybe there's a part of you that still feels guilty for not having acted differently in a crucial situation. Or perhaps you still carry the feeling of not having been good enough at certain moments in your life. I invite you to reflect on this. It is time to forgive yourself. One of the most powerful lessons I learned about forgiveness was that it's not about justifying what happened, but about freeing ourselves from the burden of carrying that story. Forgiveness is not for others, it is for ourselves. By forgiving, we create space for peace, healing, and growth. But most importantly, by forgiving, we heal the inner child who still lives within us, waiting. You ask to continue the chapter. The Power of Forgiveness Healing the Inner Child. Chapter 11. Overthinking and the Search for Security. The Inner Sanctuary. Overthinking is like a fog that slowly envelops our minds, preventing us from seeing clearly. We find ourselves trapped in a cycle of doubts, repeating the same thoughts over and over, searching for security and answers that never arrive. But true security is not found in external control. Rather, it's found in inner peace. In that sanctuary, we can only build within ourselves. I remember a time in my life when I was paralyzed by overthinking. Every decision, no matter how small, felt monumental. My mind would not stop analyzing every possible outcome, every scenario, searching for some kind of certainty that would allow me to move forward without fear. I constantly asked myself, what's the right thing to do? What will happen if I choose wrong? It was a vicious cycle. I seemed unable to escape. Has this happened to you? I'm sure that at some point, you too have found yourself in the midst of that mental fog, desperately searching for an answer that will give you security. Sometimes we believe that if we think enough, we will find the perfect solution, the decision that guarantees us success, tranquility, or happiness. But what I've learned is that no matter how much we think or analyze, true security is not found in the outcome of our decisions, but in the confidence we have in ourselves. Once, while talking with a mentor, I shared my worries with him. I explained how I felt my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts that wouldn't let me rest, and how despite all my efforts, I still felt insecure and directionless. His answer was simple, but powerful. Stop looking for security outside. True security is within you. Those words resonated deeply within me. It wasn't the outside world that needed to change, but my relationship with my own thoughts. Overthinking is a desperate search for control. We want to control the future, to foresee every possible outcome to avoid pain, failure, or regret. But the reality is that we cannot control everything that happens around us. We cannot predict with certainty what the future holds. So why stay trapped in that cycle of overthinking? I wonder, in what areas of your life do you find yourself overthinking today? Maybe it's a big decision you have to make, a conversation you're afraid to have, or a path you don't know if it's the right one. Whatever the situation, I invite you to stop for a moment and reflect. Where does that desire for security come from? In my case, I realized that my search for security came from a fear of failure, a fear of not being enough, of not meeting expectations. I was looking for a guarantee outside of me that I was never going to find. It was then that I understood that the only true security I could have was confidence in myself, in my ability to face any challenge, any outcome. The inner sanctuary is that place of peace we can go to when the outside world seems uncertain. It is the space within us where we find security not in control, but in acceptance. The acceptance that we don't always have all the answers, that we can't always foresee the future, but that no matter what happens, we have the strength to face it. One of the most powerful things I learned was that overthinking is not a sign that something is wrong with me, but a sign that I am disconnected from my inner sanctuary. When we disconnect from our inner peace, we frantically search for answers on the outside in an attempt to regain that sense of control. But external control is an illusion. True security is born from inner calm. I now ask you, how can you begin to build your own inner sanctuary? It is not something that is built overnight, but every step counts. Maybe you can start by dedicating a few minutes a day to breathing deeply, to being in silence with yourself, to listening to what your intuition has to say. Or maybe you can start by practicing self-compassion, remembering that you don't need to have all the answers right now. I remember one particular moment when my whole being felt chaotic. I was overwhelmed by important decisions, and my mind wouldn't stop looking for answers. But I decided to do something different. Instead of continuing to analyze and overthink, I stopped, closed my eyes, and connected with my breath. I let the silence envelop my mind, and in that moment of stillness, I found a peace that did not come from the answers I was seeking, but from the simple acceptance that I didn't need to have all the solutions at that moment. That was my first step toward building my inner sanctuary. The inner sanctuary is not a physical place. It is a mental and emotional state. It is the space where we allow ourselves to be at peace with what we cannot control. It is the confidence that no matter what happens, we have the ability to adapt, to learn, and to grow. True security is not in avoiding failure or uncertainty, but in knowing that we can handle them when they arrive. Chapter 12. Breaking the Chains from Victimization. To responsibility, life presents us with challenges that sometimes seem overwhelming. It's easy, almost natural, to fall into the role of a victim, to feel that the world is conspiring against us and that we have no control over what happens to us. But there is a key moment in our lives when we must make a decision. Remain trapped in victimization or break those chains and take full responsibility for our destiny. I remember a stage in my life when I felt like a victim of my circumstances. Things weren't going as I expected, and I blamed everything around me. I constantly asked myself, why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? It was a feeling of helplessness that repeated itself day after day, as if I were trapped in a web of circumstances that I couldn't control. Have you ever felt this way? It's an important question because at some point, we have all felt like victims. We have all faced situations where it seems we have no control, where we feel that the world is against us. But what I discovered was something profoundly liberating. We can't always control what happens around us, but we can always control how we respond to it. Once, in a conversation with a close friend, he told me something that transformed my way of seeing life. You are not responsible for what happens to you, but you are completely responsible for how you react to it. That phrase shook me deeply. I realized that until that moment, I had been giving my power away to external circumstances. I had allowed difficulties to define who I was and how I lived my life. But responsibility is the key to regaining our personal power. Breaking the chains of victimization requires a change in mindset. It's not easy and certainly doesn't happen overnight. It requires us to stop blaming others, circumstances, and the past, and start looking inward at the decisions we can make today to transform our lives. It was at that moment that I understood that being responsible does not mean being guilty. Being responsible means taking control of my life, regardless of what happened before. I wonder, in what areas of your life do you feel trapped by victimization? Maybe it's in your work, in a relationship, or even in your health. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that circumstances are out of our control. But what I learned is that there is always something we can do. There is always an action we can take to change our situation. One afternoon, while reflecting on my life, I made a decision to stop waiting for the world to change and start changing myself. I began to take full responsibility for everything that happened to me, even for the things that seemed to be out of my control. It was not an easy process, but as I did it, something incredible happened. I felt a freedom I had never experienced before. I was no longer trapped in the role of a victim. I had regained my power. Responsibility sets us free. When we take responsibility for our lives, we stop waiting for others to save us, for circumstances to improve on their own, or for time to heal all wounds. We realize that we are the architects of our own destiny, and although we cannot always control external events, we can control how we get up after each fall, how we respond to adversity, and how we move forward with courage. I now ask you, what decision can you make today to break the chains of victimization in your life? Maybe it's taking responsibility for something you've been putting off. Or maybe it's stopping blaming circumstances and starting to focus on what you can do to improve. Whatever the answer, the first step is to recognize that the power is in your hands. I remember a specific moment when everything seemed to be against me. Business was not going well, and the relationships in my life were tense. It was easy to fall into the narrative that it was all the fault of external factors. But instead of going down that path, I decided to do something different. I decided to take responsibility. Even if not everything was my fault, I took the reins of what I could control and began to transform my life from the inside out. That was the moment when I truly began to experience a profound change. Breaking the chains of victimization is an act of bravery. It's not easy, but it is deeply liberating. It gives us the power to take control of our lives, our decisions, and our destiny. And most importantly, it allows us to stop depending on external circumstances for our happiness and well-being. Responsibility is the first step toward true freedom. Chapter 13. The Healer's Legacy. Transmitting the gift of emotional freedom. There is a silent power in those who have, over time, learned to heal their own wounds. They not only become healers of themselves, but without realizing it, they begin to transmit that gift to others. The healer's legacy is not just the peace they find within themselves, but the emotional freedom they manage to inspire in others. I remember the moment I began to realize the impact that emotional healing was having, not only on my life, but on the lives of those around me. I had spent years working on myself, facing my own fears, healing old wounds, and learning to free myself from the emotional burdens that had held me captive for so long. And although I thought this healing journey was only mine, I discovered that my transformation was also touching others. How is emotional freedom transmitted? That is a question I often asked myself. It's not about grandiose words or heroic gestures. It's about small acts of compassion, about being a silent example of what it means to live without the emotional chains of the past. When you heal, you inspire others to heal as well. One afternoon, talking with a close friend, he told me that he had noticed a change in me. He said, "Before, it seemed like you were always carrying an invisible burden. Now there's something about you, a lightness, a freedom, that I hadn't seen before." That observation made me reflect deeply. I hadn't tried to change others or force them to see things in a different way. Simply by healing my own heart, by freeing myself from my own emotional bonds, I was showing others that emotional freedom was possible. The healer's legacy is profound and silent. It's not about telling others what they should do, but about being a living example of what it means to be emotionally free. And what I discovered was that by healing, I was not only improving my life, but also transmitting a message of hope and possibility to those around me. Healing is contagious, and when one person is freed, it inspires others to do the same. I wonder, what legacy are you transmitting to those around you? Maybe without realizing it, you are already showing others the path to emotional freedom. Every time you choose to forgive, every time you decide to let go of resentment or leave fear behind, you are creating a space for healing, not only for yourself, but for all who observe you. I remember a particular moment when this whole concept became clear to me. I was talking to someone who had been struggling with a deep emotional wound, something they had carried with them for years. Instead of giving them solutions or telling them what to do, I simply shared my story, how I had worked on my own healing, and how that had freed me. What happened next was incredible. I didn't need to convince him of anything. My example was enough for him to begin his own healing process, inspired by the possibility that he, too, could be freed. The gift of emotional freedom is not something we can impose. It is something we transmit by living it. The people around us, whether friends, family, or even coworkers, feel that freedom. They see how we face difficulties with calm, how we let go of the past with grace, and how we choose to live in the present, free from the chains of resentment and fear. That is the true legacy of the healer. To be a light that illuminates the path to inner peace and emotional freedom. I now ask you, what emotional wounds have you healed that could inspire others to do the same? Maybe you haven't realized it, but your own healing journey has the power to transform the lives of those around you. By sharing your story, by living from a place of emotional freedom, you are transmitting a powerful message that healing is possible for everyone, no matter how deep the wounds. In my own journey, I have seen how the simple act of living in peace with oneself can have a ripple effect on others. When we learn to let go, to forgive, to free ourselves from the chains of the past, we begin to radiate a different energy, an energy that invites others to do the same. This is the healer's legacy, not only to heal our own wounds, but to transmit the gift of emotional freedom to those who need it most. This chapter is a reflection on the impact we can have on others through our own healing. What healing legacy are you building? Remember that every time you choose to heal, every time you choose love over fear, forgiveness over resentment, you are planting seeds of emotional freedom in the hearts of those around you. The healer's legacy is not measured by the words we speak, but by the peace we transmit with our actions and our presence. By choosing to heal, by choosing to free ourselves from our emotional burdens, we are building a legacy that has the power to transcend generations. And in that legacy, we find the true gift of emotional freedom. Chapter 14. Emotional Integrity. The key to authentic love in its purest form is more than a fleeting emotion. It is an act of deep honesty, of being aligned with who we truly are without masks or disguises. Emotional integrity is the foundation of authentic love because without it, love becomes an illusion, a fragile construction that sooner or later collapses. I remember a stage in my life when relationships always seemed to break down, no matter how much effort I put into them. I tried to be the perfect partner, to say the right thing, to make everything work. But despite my attempts, something was always missing. Why do relationships fail despite all the effort? I asked myself. It was then that I understood that, no matter how much I tried to please others, what was really absent was my own emotional integrity. What is emotional integrity? It's not just about being honest with others, but also with ourselves. It involves being consistent with our emotions, our values, and our actions, even when it's difficult, even when it makes us vulnerable. Authentic love can only flourish when we are emotionally whole, when we are willing to be ourselves without fear of judgment or rejection. One afternoon, talking with someone very close to me, I realized an uncomfortable truth. I had been building my relationships on a foundation of unspoken expectations, on the desire to be accepted instead of being completely honest with myself. I tried to show an idealized version of myself, hoping that would lead me to the love I was looking for. But what I discovered was that by hiding parts of myself, I was denying the possibility of authentic love. Real love requires that we be seen completely, with our light and our shadows. Emotional integrity is the key to authenticity in love. When we show ourselves as we are, without fear of our emotions or our imperfections, we create a safe space for true love to grow. This doesn't mean being perfect, but being genuine. It means being willing to have difficult conversations, to express what we really feel without fear of the consequences. I wonder, in what areas of your life are you emotionally holding back? Maybe in your closest relationships, or maybe with yourself. Sometimes, for fear of conflict or rejection, we prefer not to express what we really feel. But what I've learned is that by doing so, we are building a barrier between ourselves and authentic love. I remember one particular relationship where, even though everything seemed fine on the surface, I always felt that something wasn't quite aligned. It wasn't that there was a lack of affection or respect, but there was a lack of emotional transparency. We were not being completely honest with each other or with ourselves. And it was at the moment we decided to speak with sincerity, to express our deepest emotions, that we experienced a real connection, something beyond words or appearances. Emotional integrity was the bridge to a deeper, truer love. Authentic love cannot exist without emotional integrity. Without this foundation, love becomes a game of expectations, an exchange of roles in which we try to meet the other person's expectations while hiding our true emotions. But when we are whole, when we are true to what we really feel and think, we free love from the chains of illusion and allow it to be what it is, a genuine and powerful connection. I now ask you, what parts of yourself have you been hiding in your relationships? Maybe out of fear of being vulnerable, of not being accepted, or simply because you don't want to cause conflict. But what I've learned is that vulnerability is the door to authenticity. True love can only flourish when we are brave enough to show ourselves as we are. In my own journey, I discovered that emotional integrity not only strengthens our relationships with others, but also the relationship we have with ourselves. When we are emotionally whole, we give ourselves permission to feel, to express, to be authentic. And in that act of honesty, we create a space for love to grow genuinely, without expectations or pressure, only from a place of truth. This chapter is an invitation to reflect on your own emotional integrity. Where can you be more honest with yourself and with others? It's not about being perfect, but about being authentic, about being aligned with your emotions, your values, and your actions. Because when we do that, when we live from a place of emotional integrity, we not only give ourselves the opportunity to experience authentic love, but we also inspire others to do the same. Emotional integrity is the foundation of any authentic relationship. Without it, love falters. It is built on unspoken assumptions and expectations. But with it, love has a solid foundation, a safe space where it can grow and flourish fully. It is in emotional integrity where we find the true key to a love that transcends the superficial and touches the deepest part of our being. Chapter 15. Facing the Inner. Shadows. The Path to Personal Mastery. The path to personal mastery is not a simple journey. It requires courage, introspection, and the willingness to face our deepest shadows. Our inner shadows are not our enemies, but parts of ourselves that we have avoided seeing, accepting, and healing. And in that process of facing them, we discover what it truly means to achieve personal mastery. I remember a time in my life when I was in a constant struggle with a part of me that seemed to hinder my success. Despite all my efforts, I felt that something was holding me back. I constantly asked myself, why can't I move forward? What is stopping me? It wasn't until I dared to look inward, at those shadows I had been ignoring, that I began to understand that the real obstacle was not outside of me but within. What are inner shadows? They are the parts of us that we have suppressed or ignored, our fears, insecurities, resentments, and doubts. They are those aspects that we prefer not to see, but that by not facing them, they become invisible barriers that prevent us from moving forward. Facing our shadows is the first step toward liberation and personal mastery. One afternoon, while reflecting on my life and the decisions I had made, I realized that many of the difficulties I faced were not the result of external circumstances, but of my resistance to facing those parts of me that made me uncomfortable. My fear of failure, my need for approval, and my tendency to avoid conflict were shadows that, without realizing it, kept me trapped. I couldn't move toward personal mastery without first facing those shadows with courage and acceptance. The path to personal mastery is not an escape from our shadows, but a confrontation with them. It is a process of looking directly at what we have avoided for so long and accepting that those shadows are part of us, but they do not have to define us. By facing them, we realize that true mastery is not the absence of shadows, but the integration of them into our lives without them controlling us. I wonder, what inner shadows have you been avoiding facing? Maybe it's the fear of not being good enough, the fear of failing, or the doubt of whether you truly deserve the success and happiness you long for. These shadows are common, and we all have them. But what makes the difference is how we choose to face them. Facing the shadows is an act of courage that leads us to a greater understanding of ourselves. I remember one particular moment when I decided to face one of my deepest shadows, my fear of rejection. For years, this fear had influenced my decisions, made me doubt myself, and led me to avoid situations where I felt I wasn't in control. But instead of continuing to run, I decided to face that fear directly. What I discovered was transformative. The fear did not disappear immediately, but by acknowledging and accepting it, it lost the power it once had over me. Personal mastery is not about eliminating our fears, but about learning to walk with them. Facing our inner shadows allows us to access a deeper level of personal growth. By doing so, we stop being prisoners of our emotions and automatic behaviors and begin to make conscious decisions aligned with who we truly are. Personal mastery is not a goal, but a continuous process of self-discovery and transformation. I now ask you, what inner shadows are slowing down your personal growth? Maybe you have been avoiding facing them for fear of what you might find. But what I've learned is that by facing them, we not only heal those parts of ourselves, but we also open the door to new opportunities for growth, success, and fulfillment. In my own journey toward personal mastery, I discovered that true power does not reside in avoiding difficulties, but in facing them with courage. Our inner shadows do not disappear when we ignore them. They only get bigger. But when we decide to face them, we free ourselves from the chains that have kept us trapped in fear and doubt. This chapter is an invitation to look inward, to identify those shadows you have been avoiding, and to face them with bravery. What are you willing to do to move toward personal mastery? Remember that true growth does not happen in comfort, but in the moments when we decide to face what makes us uncomfortable, what challenges us, and what scares us. The path to personal mastery is a journey toward self-knowledge and the integration of all parts of ourselves, including the shadows. And when we make the decision to face them, we discover a freedom and a strength we had never known before. In that act of bravery, we find the true meaning of personal mastery, not in perfection, but in the complete acceptance of who we are. Chapter 16. The Awakening of Dormant Potential, Unleashing Inner Greatness. Each of us carries immense potential within, a source of greatness that often remains hidden, waiting to be awakened. Unleashing that potential is the first step toward the extraordinary life we all seek. But often, we get stuck in routine, in fear, or in doubt, preventing that greatness from seeing the light. I remember a key moment in my life when I felt stuck. Despite my efforts, it seemed that I was not achieving the success that I knew deep down I was capable of reaching. I constantly asked myself, why am I not moving forward? What is stopping me? It was then that I realized that what was really holding me back was not external circumstances, but my own limiting beliefs, those thoughts that made me doubt my ability to unleash my true potential.